I'm Emily, and my EPQ is a dissertation on free will and whether quantum mechanics makes it possible.
In this video, I discuss what my project's about, how I chose it, organisation, research, the writing process, skill development, and my reviewing process.
The most common definition of free will is the ability to have done otherwise than you actually did. This means that if you could have chocolate or vanilla ice cream and you chose chocolate, then it's possible you could have chosen vanilla instead. This sounds like common sense, but classical physics suggests that our universe is deterministic. So if you chose chocolate, this was the only possible outcome. This might not matter much for ice cream, but what if the choice is between murdering or not murdering somebody? Can it be right to hold a murderer responsible if they quite literally couldn't have done otherwise? Some people believe quantum mechanics restores our free will. At a very basic level, quantum mechanics seems to suggest there's a fundamental indeterminism in our universe. So if we fire an electron through a board with two slits in it, even with perfectly accurate knowledge of the equipment, it's impossible to know where it lands on the screen behind the slits until we take a measurement. This means that if we find the electron at A, it's possible it could have been at B instead. This seems to mean that it could have done otherwise than it actually did, but that's already controversial depending on your interpretation of quantum theory. My dissertation considers whether quantum theory can account for free will, and whether randomness in the decision-making process is really what people mean by freedom. Choosing my project was difficult, as I have lots of different interests and I'm naturally quite indecisive.
I used a personal audit, video showcases, and mind maps to attempt to organise my thoughts. Based on this, I quickly settled on doing a dissertation on New Labour and the Iraq War, as I wanted to get started quickly. But it was quite an arbitrary decision, and it doesn't relate to the degree I want to study and will involve skills that are quite similar to those used in History A-level. So I gave myself some time to reconsider and used a table to explore lots of sources relating to the different interests I have and how well they meet my goals with my EPQ topic. Free will debate turns out to be very interesting, related to the joint honours degree I want to study, which is physics and philosophy, and is helpfully distant from my A-levels as I've never studied philosophy before. To make a long-term plan, I needed to know everything I'd need to complete for my EPQ. I used the Band 4 marking criteria in the specification to make a to-do list specific to my project with time estimates for each item. After researching Excel techniques like conditional formatting and data validation, I converted this list into a Gantt chart. I made 2 copies, one which shows my plans currently and allows me to change the colour of items when I complete them, and another which I filled in as I went along to show that I was sticking to deadlines. As well as the Gantt charts, I've also kept a general diary every week, as well as diaries for research, skills, and review, so I can track my progress on each of the assessment objectives every week. I also use tools like Eisenhower matrices and to-do lists to make short-term plans. To plan my research, I made a source selection table and decided which research methods to use. I recorded all of the research I did in a research log and analysed all of my sources for currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, and purpose. To start with, I explore more basic sources like lecture series for first-year philosophy undergraduates and introductory science and philosophy books and videos. When I first tried moving on to journal articles, I found that I needed better knowledge of quantum mechanics to understand what I was reading. So I delayed my move to academic sources so I could watch an introductory quantum mechanics lecture series by MIT. I also started listening to philosophy podcasts for my EPQ, as this was easy to fit around my routine. After this, I moved on to academic journals.
Throughout this process, I developed my researching skills a lot, learning to develop my note-taking style to both the type of source and when and where I was using it.
At the start, my notes were disorganised and overly detailed. I found that the Cornell style helped me to make them more organised and efficient, although mind maps were better for the quantum mechanics lectures, as they included a more visual component. As I usually listen to my podcasts on buses or runs, making detailed notes for these was harder, so I made summaries from memory after listening. This helped me to remember the content better due to the active recall style.
For my primary research, I used a survey to better understand how people define free will.
I split people's definitions into categories and analysed their prevalence in my dissertation. I also interviewed 2 philosophers specialising in metaphysics to discuss different viewpoints on free will with experts. To plan my dissertation, I first made summary mind maps for free will, metaethics, and interpretations of quantum mechanics. I then used a combination of mind maps, flowcharts, and summary notes to plan in more detail. I wrote my dissertation in 5 drafts, working on the first 3 independently and then using the feedback of friends and family to help perfect the final 2. I also asked for comments from my friend's dad, who's a physicist, and the husband of my mum's friend, who's a professor of philosophy, and they identified some helpful points. A strength of my dissertation from the start would be the breadth it covers and the line of argument. A weakness was initially my referencing, but this improved throughout my drafts. A weakness I especially struggled with was making it accessible, given the technical scientific content. I improved this with my glossary, but ultimately it's written like an academic paper, so this will always be challenging for people with limited knowledge. To ensure I was constantly targeting new skills, I made a skill audit at the start of my project and ranked my abilities using a 1 to 10 system. I also kept a skill diary that I filled in at least once a week, detailing a skill I'd worked on and how I would rank my abilities. At the end of the project, I created graphs of my ranking over time for each individual skill. I also made radar graphs from 3 more comprehensive skill reviews I did at the start, middle, and end of my project.
To ensure I was consistently evaluating my work, I kept a review diary every week.
This was for identifying successes, problems, proposed solutions, and chosen solutions with reasons. By doing this regularly, I was able to use my evaluation constructively to learn from it and support my skill development. I also completed 2 formal self-reviews and 2 peer reviews where I was able to consider my progress more comprehensively and identify more long-term things to work on. A key strength of my project was how well structured it was around the marking criteria, and also the number and range of sources I used, which extended far beyond 50. A weakness would be that because I had 5 different trackers to fill in most weeks, these could sometimes fall behind. I rectified this by setting aside an hour a week only for updating these trackers.
If I could do my project again, I would move on to academic sources more quickly, update my bibliography as I go along, and have created weekly slots for filling in all my tracking systems from the start.
Finally, I asked a close friend and one of my parents to read my first, third, and final draft of my dissertation, ranking its performance in different areas. The graph shows a positive correlation between draft number and the rankings they gave me.
Overall, going from knowing nothing about philosophy to reading and enjoying academic sources has been a hugely rewarding challenge. And writing my dissertation, although tough, has given me something to show for my hard work.
Thank you so much for listening. If you could take 2 minutes to fill in my survey, that would be amazing. Thanks again.